Welcome to the BPM360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Caspar. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast.
Caspar, episode 3.
Hey Russell, how are you?
I'm fine.
Very good.
Looking forward to moving through the framework. And covering every angle.
Yeah. So we're shifting our angle now from the executive sponsor, which we talked about in the previous episode, to basically the rest of the stakeholders. Because what I think a lot of organizations, and certainly a lot of BPM project teams, might miss out on in the early stages is that there is a bunch of stakeholders in your organization that to a lesser or more degree you need to satisfy, and you need to involve them and engage with them. So I think it might be good in this episode, Russell, to just put our brainwaves together and see what kind of stakeholder groups do we have when you talk about implementing BPM in a larger organization. I mean, I'll kick off with the easy one. Your subject matter experts or your process experts in your organization. I mean, that's a clear stakeholder group because those are the people that you want to be active on your platform, right? And then process managers might be another group that you need to engage with because they are depending on the technology that you might implement in your BPM project. And probably there are many more. So let's explore that for a second.
Yeah, and the way you're going about it now, you're looking very much from a BPM perspective. So you have your BPM roles in mind. It says, I want to implement BPM, and I know I need a process owner. I need a process expert. At least you also then said subject matter experts. And this is somehow a challenge because if you're, let's say you're new to the organization, let's say you've been brought in from external, you don't really know the organization in itself, and then you have like this, let's say generic picture of BPM in front of you with your roles, then you even struggle communicating. Who do you want to talk to? I want to talk to the process expert. I'm not a process expert. There's somebody there, 25 years experience. He knows the process in and out.
Yep.
But is he identifiable as a process expert? He'll say, no. I'm just been doing this work. I just do my job. He's actually the guy. So identifying stakeholders from an organizational perspective and getting the right people, that's actually the challenge. But on the bottom line, I think you're very right about that. This is where you want to get to. You want to have a very clear allocation of the subject matter experts and also then the people that are more or less responsible for decisions around processes. You want to allocate them, but you also want to get them into these roles, and they're not there yet at the beginning.
That's true. Yeah.
So let's take it from a different aspect, and we have this also with the sponsorship. We've been briefly discussing this as well and think of it more as if you're like as a process, you're setting up BPM. Then what are the use cases, and who are you providing your service to, or would you think that you can provide your service to, and who would you be interacting with, so more closely collaborating with? And here comes to my mind just one example where there's typically always a big stake around process management, everything around the quality management, compliance and risk management. They're so closely related. They're also management processes. They're activities around management. And the methodology behind it is very related to processes. So typically, even if I haven't had a classical BPM organization in place, you always have had a lot of departments around, for example, quality management. Do they talk about process managers? No, they'll talk about quality managers, and they'll have their own understanding. But here, a lot of the times you have stakeholders that have a clear understanding of the why are you doing BPM, And they also see that you can offer them a certain, let's say, service in helping them getting their job done, Because will be helping to identify, engaging with subject matter experts to get process defined in a structured manner that they, from the compliance side, can actually, link into this. So, and this is so from an identification perspective, I think from a BPM, you have to think about what are the use cases and services you want to provide, and who are then the departments and people you need to interact with, and who will
Yep.
be consuming, but all is a collaboration of providing you their services in order to get something jointly, collaboration wise done together.
Yep.
And here the other point next to quality management, what I see is say for around the project managers and IT, So
Mm-hmm.
definitely not always an easy buy-in, but here, along a lot of IT initiatives nowadays, there will always be touch points to processes.
Yep.
And
True.
understand that here we have like the key user, the definition of key users, which are very closely related sometimes to what we see as like subject matter experts and process experts. Like it's not one-to-one the same, but coming close.
Yep.
So digging into the way, the procedures and methods around the project management and big IT transformations, and then also here identify stakeholders
Yep. No, that's absolutely true.
for the topic of process management is actually something I think you need to look at independent from the classical view, the BPM view on process experts and process owners.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. And I think that quality management is a very good example. I think risk management is a similar example where you very often see that risk managers have a very good grasp on the kind of risks that are identified and exposed in an organization. And they also have typically a very good grasp on the process landscape and where these risks occur. The bottleneck and the challenge that they often have is that the process landscape that they have in mind and that they have captured typically somewhere in an Excel list maybe is not the same as the one that you have maybe documented in your BPM platform. And that's just, that's waste. That's a pity. That should be aligned. It should be the same source where you start from. There's only one process landscape in an organization. There's not multiple ones. There's just one. So one of the things that I believe is very important when you start a BPM initiative anyway is to do this big stakeholder mapping exercise. I think it's a very well-known concept from project management where you basically say, okay, let's take inventory of all of the stakeholders that we can think of. And yes, I started out from the BPM side, clearly, just to get started, but you have them from every angle in the organization. And then identify what is their attitude towards BPM? Are they positive or negative? And what is their influence on the decision making? Is that big or small? And then based on how you map them in these quadrants, you're going to have a pretty good view on how your stakeholder engagement plan should look like. So that's I normally say that's part of the political game that goes on around any big project in an organization, but it needs to get done. Otherwise, you have no idea where your friends are in the organization and where your pitfalls might be.
And one thing about, as you said, mapping this out and also maybe even monitoring their attitude or the exposure to process management, I think I have the impression that this is a very often or too often it's a one-off exercise that people do in their initiatives, and they don't establish it as a continuous practice within the BPM initiative.
True.
So I think it's vital to understand that it's a journey, and your stakeholder management is something that you need to constantly be aware of and develop and refine also. So from not just from somebody's changed department or there's somebody new in the risk department now, their attitude to BPM has changed. Let's say that's tactically something you also need to keep your eye open
absolutely
on your stakeholder and sponsorship level. If all the CEOs changed, have you good? Was that bad?
Yeah.
No, but seriously, and around the stakeholders, what I also think is that the BPM initiatives get like run down. They identify key sponsors and stakeholders, and they're working on them, but they don't manage to evolve the stakeholder and the whole, say, the usage, the spread of BPM, from a maturity perspective, but also from a reach. There's something that clearly I think has to be an objective of BPM to grow and expand.
Yeah.
And it is always very much, let's say, headquarters centric. So your view on stakeholders, and the way you set up your organization later on as well, we'll definitely come to that on governance and also the human resource, like human affairs topics. The stakeholders are, this view has to be continuously developed and should expand. So lastly, we get to a situation where BPM is well established with the experts and the owners.
Mm-hmm.
And then this purpose question comes up. Now we need to maintain it and sustain it. The big initiatives are over. Okay, now who could actually who can this add value to? And if you come down to the level of some mature, whatever process oriented, everybody, any employee, with a computer should actually get access to the process repository in order to understand what he's doing, how it connects with the strategy, or any guidelines and sees it will integrate into this level. From a context from compliance down to operations. Fantastic. But look at that from a stakeholder perspective. What does that mean? You have to go down to the level of actually any resource that actually is working in the context of processes, executing them, check what is actually what service BPM is providing them, and how far do they also have some, let's say, voice in your reception of, are you doing a good job or not as BPM?
Yeah.
And here I think then really getting more advanced techniques of having continuous surveys on your communities you have then, and seeing the whole community as a stakeholder. Yeah, ultimately. It's not just that I do it for the two people that are paying me the money, but really extending this view on stakeholders more into what is the community are we actually building here, and how can we maintain this community and continuously work with them. Stakeholder goes in a different dimension.
So interesting example here. At the moment that you start working with a larger group and a wider group of stakeholders, also cultural aspects come into play. And I'll give you a very, very simple example. In my previous company, as you know, we had set up BPM on quite a high maturity level, certainly from a process point of view. So we started venturing out in other topics that we could include into our BPM platform to make things easier. And the one thing that we came up with was what we call the corporate requirements. So on head office level, I think it was the internal control department, they drafted maybe a 15-page document that for each functional domain said, these are the rules thou shall live by. If you want to buy something, thou shall make a purchase requisition. Well, these kind of internal requirements. And I've spent
like the Bible.
It's almost like the Bible. Yeah. But the interesting thing with that is that a lot of these requirements tie in directly into your business processes. The fact that you need to make a purchase requisition is something that is directly translatable to your purchase to pay process. So I've spent a great deal of time with one of the guys in internal control. He said, listen, we can translate this into objects into our BPM platform. And if we do, we can put a governance workflow on it so that every time that one of your global process owners changes one of the requirements, it only has to be done once in our BPM platform, and then everything else will be dominoes falling down. In the end, we had to make a very conscious decision whether or not we wanted to enforce that via our executive stakeholder, because, and this is, you'll laugh about this, because it was the assertion of our internal control colleagues that most of the GPOs, the global process owners, simply were not technically adequate enough to do it in our BPM platform. They thought it was hard enough in Word to do that. So it was a cultural thing that we had a whole group of people that we technically simply could not get onto the BPM platform because they only had to do it once a year and the learning curve was too steep.
Yeah.
And in it by itself, I get that. So we settled for a compromise where we actually put the Word documents into the BPM platform and linked them wherever we needed to link them. But it was still not the solution that we had in mind. But even there, your stakeholders sometimes might just pull the rug underneath from you because of something simple like we're not technically savvy enough to do this. Could you imagine my frustration at that point in time?
Yeah, absolutely. But that's why you say culture. That's all.
Yeah,
That's it.
or maybe generational in that case. The average
Yeah,
global process owner was, I think, at least 50 plus at that time. Nothing wrong
yeah.
with
No,
that. We're there
I
now,
think
but
being tech savvy, it's that's always a level of frustration we have when you see that people are pushing back on actually principally very good ideas, but are not really following through because of
yeah,
some
yeah, true,
technicality
true.
and it's there.
But
And
it was an example of stakeholder management where you think you have everything under control, and then something just comes swooping in from the side, and you're back to square one. And it's fine. You need to deal with
yeah,
that.
but that's exactly what you have to, let's say, live with, exactly this diversity in the stakeholder, their perception of the value versus also what they're willing to invest in either adapting to new technologies or the new methods that you're introducing. That I think that's one of the big things about stakeholder management is a understanding real in depth actually what is driving them
Yeah,
and how again and again over communication or by even adapting your own approach and your tools, being pragmatic there, is that you always constantly work on the buy-in of stakeholders and also don't get settled for what you once had established. Yeah, because the dynamics of the way you evolve with BPM will always require you to visit actually your stakeholders and also review their perception of
yeah,
where you're and in order to keep this continuous support up and running.
yeah,
And it is astonishing. You have this, I think you always have in all initiatives that are long going, you always have these like these phases when there is like a high attention, maybe because of communication or some, initiatives, and you always have like a bit of a slowdown phase where people are more huddling up,
yeah,
taking care of
yeah,
their own business. And then again, phases when momentum takes up and you can, refresh then the view on certain topics. I think that's also the nature of all these initiatives, that it doesn't, just keep one constant level of growth, and you will always have like dips and pushbacks due
yeah,
to other folks in the organization. And that's why I think, as you just mentioned, having a clear systematic on how you evaluate your stakeholders, that maybe in 2 years' time you can actually have a possibility of looking back and seeing where have we come from,
yeah,
our view on stakeholders at the beginning and now after half a year and now after a year, and just take with that. Once you set it up once, don't just lock it away and say I've done it, it's done,
yeah,
but really set it up in a manner like we do process management as well.
yeah,
We
true.
like set it up for a long journey. That the stakeholder management is something that will be you will be following up with along your initiative, and everything you do and you document, do it in a way that in a year or in half a year you can revisit it and
Yeah,
then reflect on where you've come from. I think it's positive as well because you sometimes people don't really, they forget actually what journey they have behind them. Yeah,
yeah,
and they forget to see on what low level they actually started, and they get frustrated although they have managed so much.
yeah,
And
true.
also maybe a topic for human affairs to be able to continuously be able to recap and uh, tell that story, communicate that story. The road of the journey you've gone through helps stakeholders themselves reflect on. Oh yeah, they get frustrated as well. They're in the slump, but you have to be able to tap into them and say, hey, yes, but just think where we were, a year ago.
Yeah.
So I think
Oh, absolutely.
communication, stakeholder management is a lot about storytelling as well. And I think we're sometimes too much. fixated with the current issue we have directly in front of us,
Yep.
and forget to see the journey that we've already come in this environment, and to have that. And that's one point of the community building as well, that they feel as one and they help you narrate this story and take this up. Yeah.
One of the things in community building, I think, which is specifically valid for your stakeholder group, is building critical mass. So getting that group of people to follow you reach such a big number that it becomes self-propelling. One of the tricks that I learned early on in my career is that at the moment that you need to do a project where you will always have people that are pro and con a project. And one of the tricks that I learned from one of my early career managers, he said, listen, I'll spend disproportionately much time converting an opponent of my project, so somebody who sees a lot of bears on the road. I'll try to convert that person into an ambassador. And I'll spend a lot of time on that, because the reason why, if I manage to do that, I can make that ambassador my project manager. And then you'll have a project manager that literally thought about all of the pitfalls that could happen in the project. And rest assured, he or she will do anything to avoid them. And this has worked on a number of occasions in projects where I was part of the project team. It worked really, really well. So if you look at the normal distribution, on the right hand side there is your early adapters, then you get your fast followers, and then you get your laggards, and then at all of the back you get your opponents. Find that one opponent that you think might have a big influence, and spend time on that person to convert it into a believer. If you manage that, half your project is in the pocket. That was really an interesting learning I've had in maybe 15 years ago already, and I've applied it once or twice in my own projects. So that certainly is a trick I just want to hand out to the audience today, just for free. That's how I am.
But I think the combination is you have to go for the people that you know have a big influence. And what I think is interesting about stakeholder management is, as you mentioned, you have that, like the classical, when we're talking about sponsorship, you look at the hierarchy, you go as far as you can up, and then you say, how do you find the sponsor? You go to the top, and then
absolutely.
And if he closes the door, you go down until somebody listens to you. But stakeholders, it's in big organizations, the companies, it's a different beast.
True.
So as you said, the early adopters. So where do you identify like your coaches and your real subject matter experts that are that will follow you and really have some value contribution because they really know the organization, and these typically are people that really other people listen to. Now, it doesn't matter which level they are in the organization, you have these gems of expertise where people follow because they see and believe that they are, really, talking, they know what they're talking about.
The real life influencers.
Exactly. And these influences, positive and negative, you have to identify. And there I agree. The easy ones are the ones that are following you. So cool. But then digging into the influences that are pushing back, and what I think is interesting is when you do engage with them, these typically are people who will give you good reasons why they're pushing, and sometimes it's astonishing that due to their experience, maybe their frustration on early initiatives where they will push back, whatever it is. It's valuable to dig into these concerns. So even if you win it over, I'm still with you, but I think that's the best case, and I think that there's a good ability of with these levels to really dig in and try to say, what can we do to be able to make this work, and how can I actually take your concerns seriously and work against them, but there's a lot of insight in there.
Absolutely.
And a lot of things to be learned on, what are the risks that maybe he's been confronted with in the past, And if you take them serious, I think you definitely are mitigating a lot of real-time risks. I don't think it's just, let's say, pure, blatant political pushback. Not on that level of people that are influential in the organization. Yeah, that's
Yep.
organizationally, like people that are claiming and hiding, like building of walls also have to be overcome. But I think what you're saying around these influencers are typically people that are also well respected in the organization
Oh yeah.
due to their experience and to a certain extent broad exposure. And this is, I really think that the core of stakeholder management is identifying these people
Yep.
and winning them over and bringing them in to your team, because that really then really accelerates and leverages the whole credibility and the success of the initiative. Yeah,
Yep.
that's
Great.
the point.
I think that was an interesting sort of wrap up, Russell. Time does fly, so we need to wrap this one up as well. Now, if you're listening to this and you have questions about it, and we can absolutely understand that, we'll share an email address in the show notes that you can send your questions to, and then if we assemble enough questions, we'll dedicate an episode to the questions, Russell. Right?
Yes, absolutely. I always have the impression that we spent, hardly covered, really haven't gone, in depth that we could go. And I could imagine that there are some questions out there, or maybe maybe anecdotes that people want to share around the topics we just, raised here. So
Yep.
it would be great if you reach out to us and we could then, pick this up and then get into some like communication and
Ex-
on the topics and dig into these questions or anecdotes that you have and like to share them with the community. So
Yep.
yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah.
please send us whatever questions or inputs you have, feedback.
Yep.
Everything welcomed.
We'll put the email address and the website of the podcast in the show notes, and we'll be looking forward to episode number 4. See you next time, Russell.
See you next time.
All right.
Take
Cheers.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye.